Hello and welcome to this pre-recorded event for GCSE Physics, feedback on Unit 3 from the June 2015 series. To help you get the most out of this feedback, you may want to have the following documents handy, as we will refer to them during the session. These are the aims and objectives of the course. The first question we will look at is one of the extended writing questions from the higher tier paper. This response was Level 3, scoring 6 marks, as it made a clear comparison between the design and use of the two different types of particle accelerator. It presented differences and similarities with just the right amount of detail. Candidates who did well in this type of question had a clear understanding of the physics and were able to structure their responses in a logical order, addressing all points in the question. This response to the same question was well structured and gave good detail about the differences, but made no reference to the similarities between the accelerators, and so achieved Level 2, scoring 4 marks. This candidate presented only one limited difference, the difference in size. This was a Level 1 answer, scoring 2 marks. Some 6-mark questions test knowledge and understanding by asking for comparisons. This is an opportunity for those candidates who have revised well and practiced constructing logical responses to score well. Successful candidates made sure they discussed differences and similarities in some detail, and their answer followed a logical sequence. This is question 3C Part 2 from the Foundation Tier paper. It required candidates to analyze a graph and describe the relationship shown using data from the graph. Candidates who did well referred to the decrease in percentage of radiation getting through the material, with the increase in thickness of the material, and the fact that this decrease was nonlinear or leveled off. They were able to support their ideas with data from the graph. This scored all 3 marks. This was a calculation from the Foundation Tier paper, question 2B Part 2. This required candidates to be familiar with the use of suffixes to show changing values of the same quantity. An example is V1 and V2 for 2 different values of volume. This scored all 3 marks. This showed a common misunderstanding of this type of notation. V2 is taken to mean V squared. This scored no marks. In calculation questions to do with gases, the correct numerical answer scored full marks, even without working being shown. However, it is advisable to show working at each step, so that marks can be gained, even if the final numerical answer is not correct. This is particularly important with equations involving the uses of suffixes. Activity 1 is based on question 2B from the higher tier paper. Using the mark scheme, Decide what mark you think this should be awarded and why. At this point, you may wish to pause the video to carry out the activity. This is classed as a recall item in the specification, page 3, 5.6. This response starts off with irrelevant material, and as a result, almost runs out of answer space. This scored 2 marks. Successful candidates were well grounded in the basics, many of which are recall items in the specification. This scores all 3 marks in the first sentence, with no need to write outside the answer space. This was from the higher tier paper, question 3B4. The lens equation is probably the most demanding equation in the specification. This candidate may have tried substituting into the equation using a calculator, but had not written down the steps in the process. The result was that neither the candidate nor the examiner could keep track. This scored no marks. The second line of this response shows clearly that the substitution and rearrangement have been done correctly, so it scores the first 2 marks. Things go astray in the evaluation. This response scores full marks. Even though the spelling of lens is not correct, and the final answer has not been rounded up, the working is clearly shown, and hints at a well-established routine. This question was on the foundation tier paper. It was one of the 2 extended writing items on the paper. Question 5C, Part 3. This response scored no marks. The candidate made some reference to the practical situation, but was not answering the question as it was asked. There was no reference to what happened as the angle of incidence was increased either before or after the critical angle. This response gives a good account of what happens before the critical angle, but does not go on to say what happens when the angle of incidence is increased beyond the critical angle. Candidates had gaps in their knowledge and did not base their responses on the introduction and diagram earlier in the question. In this extended writing question, the diagram from earlier in the question could help candidates structure their answers. Candidates who had done this experiment and remembered it did well. Activity 2 is based on this question from the foundation tier paper, question 5C, Part 3. Using the mark scheme, decide on what mark you think this should be awarded and why. At this point, you may wish to pause the video to carry out the activity. This is a detailed explanation linking ideas about reflection before the critical angle is reached, with the total internal reflection after the critical angle. It is a Level 3 6-mark response. Improvements can be made in all these issues if candidates practice the suggestions made earlier when they are attempting questions in past papers and other support material. Here are some useful links for examination statistics and grade boundaries. We have just published our specifications on the Edexcel website. They have been published early in draft form to enable teachers to have early sight of our proposed approach. We are also running a series of launch events. Our draft specifications and sample assessment material, as well as further information about our launch events, can be found on edexcel.com. Thank you for taking part in this event. You will soon receive an email directing you to an online feedback form. The form takes no more than a couple of minutes to complete. Please let us know your thoughts by filling in this short form.